The bullet hole in the reinforced glass told a story that wedding rings couldn't. Outside, rain slashed across the Virginia countryside as security lights swept the perimeter of an estate that resembled a fortress more than a home. Inside, a silver-haired man stood at the window, gun still warm in his hand, watching headlights disappear down the private road. Behind him, a woman with auburn hair carefully bandaged a cut on her arm, her movements precise, the steady hands of a surgeon unshaken by violence. "Is this normal for you?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. "No," he answered, turning to face her. "This is what happens when enemies realize you have something to lose." Their eyes met across the darkened room, two strangers bound by signatures on paper, now tied by blood on glass. The contract had specified separate lives under one roof. It never mentioned shared danger, shared secrets, or the unexpected cost of pretending to love someone who was becoming impossible to hate. Colonel Douglas Harrington, U.S. Marine Corps retired, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching a storm gather over the Potomac. At 60, his military bearing remained impeccable, spine straight, shoulders squared, silver hair cut with precision. The weathered lines on his face told stories of deserts and war zones long before they spoke of boardrooms and billion-dollar defense contracts. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Winters is here. Send her in. Carol." Martha Winters had been the Harrington family attorney for 30 years. At 72, she moved with the deliberate confidence of someone who had navigated Washington's most treacherous legal waters and emerged unscathed. The charcoal Armani suit she wore was as precise as the legal briefs she prepared. "You look concerned, Martha," Douglas said, gesturing to the sitting area rather than the formal conference table. "That's never a good sign. Annie, the board meeting didn't go as we'd hoped." Martha placed her leather portfolio on the coffee table between them. "Richard made his move sooner than expected." Douglas's jaw tightened at the mention of his brother-in-law. Richard Blackwood had been circling Harrington Global Defense like a vulture since Elizabeth's death 8 years ago. As vice president of operations and a significant shareholder, Richard had positioned himself as the natural successor should Douglas falter. "What's his angle this time?" Douglas asked, though he suspected the answer. Martha slid a document across the table. "A psychological assessment, supposedly conducted during your annual physical." Douglas scanned the document, his expression darkening. "I never underwent this evaluation." The report detailed symptoms of severe PTSD, cognitive decline, and increasingly erratic decision-making. All fabrications, but cunningly mixed with enough truth to be plausible. Douglas had struggled with PTSD since the Gulf War, but he'd managed it successfully for decades. "The board is concerned," Martha continued. "The Archer contract renewal is coming up. $2 billion in defense technology. The Pentagon won't award it if there's any question about stable leadership." Douglas stood, moving back to the window. "Richard's been waiting for this opportunity since Elizabeth died." "There's more." Martha's voice softened slightly. "The report specifically mentions your isolation, your inability to form meaningful personal connections since Elizabeth's passing. The board is concerned about your emotional stability." Douglas turned, a rare flash of anger breaking through his disciplined demeanor. "My personal life is my own business." "Not when you're the face of a company bidding on a $2 billion defense contract," Martha countered. "Richard's narrative is compelling the aging widower, haunted by war, unable to move forward, increasingly unstable." "Now what do you suggest?" Martha's expression shifted to something almost apologetic. "The board would be reassured by signs of personal stability, a relationship, a partner." Douglas stared at her. "You're suggesting I find a wife to appease the board." "I'm suggesting you consider how to counter Richard's narrative," Martha replied. "The annual Foundation Gala is in 6 weeks. The board, the Pentagon Committee, everyone who matters will be there. It would be advantageous if you weren't alone." After Martha left, Douglas remained at the window, watching lightning split the darkening sky. The storm clouds reflected his mood perfectly. His secure phone buzzed with a text message that simply read, "Mockingbird compromised." Douglas's military instincts immediately kicked in. Mockingbird was the code name for his private office security system. Someone had breached it. Slipping the phone into his pocket, he moved with practiced casualness to his desk, pressed a hidden button that would alert security, and then opened his computer as if checking emails. The reflection in the screen showed a barely perceptible movement in the air vent behind him. In one fluid motion that belied his 60 years, Douglas dropped to the floor as a tranquilizer dart embedded itself in his leather chair. Rolling behind the desk, he grabbed the Sig Sauer he kept in a hidden compartment. "Security breach, floor 30, he spoke into his wrist communicator. "One intruder, possibly armed." The ceiling vent crashed open and a black-clad figure dropped into the office. Douglas didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot into the wall and shouted, "Federal building, on the ground." Instead of complying, the intruder kicked Douglas's desk with enough force to send it sliding toward him. Douglas vaulted over it, closing the distance. The intruder was fast, but Douglas had decades of close combat experience. He blocked a strike aimed at his throat, twisted the attacker's arm behind their back, and slammed them into the wall. The intruder broke free with surprising strength and bolted for the door. Douglas pursued as they burst onto the executive floor. Staff members dove out of the way as the chase continued toward the stairwell. The intruder was headed up, not down, unusual for an escape. Douglas followed, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. 30 years of daily PT, even after retirement from active duty, had kept him in remarkable condition. The stairwell led to the roof, where the company helipad was located. Was a helicopter waiting? Had Richard arranged an elaborate extraction? The rooftop door burst open to the storm, rain now falling in sheets. The intruder sprinted across the helipad, but no helicopter awaited. Instead, they ran straight for the edge of the building. "Stop!" Douglas shouted. "There's nowhere to go." The figure turned, and for the first time, Douglas could see a pair of intense eyes through the mask. Then, incredibly, the intruder stepped backward off the roof. Douglas rushed to the edge, expecting to see a body falling 30 stories. Instead, he glimpsed the intruder sliding down a barely visible zip line to the adjacent building. Military-grade equipment, professional training. Security personnel burst onto the roof behind him, weapons drawn. "Sir, are you all right?" the lead guard asked. "I'm fine," Douglas replied, watching the figure disappear into the neighboring building. "But I want every second of surveillance footage from the past 48 hours. Someone just went to a lot of trouble to get into my office." Back in his office, Douglas examined the dart that had missed him. No manufacturer markings, military-grade paralytic, not intended to kill, but to incapacitate. His computer showed signs of someone attempting to access his private files, the ones containing his personal notes on Richard's questionable dealings with foreign defense contractors. "Sir," his head of security entered after a brief knock. "We've reviewed the footage. The intruder bypassed 16 separate security measures to reach your office. This wasn't a random attack." Douglas nodded. "Anything in my files compromised?" "No, sir. Your encryption held, but we found this." The security chief held up a small device. "It's a sophisticated listening device, military grade, but with modifications I've never seen before." Douglas took the device, examining it carefully. Russian design, Chinese modifications, sold on the black market to anyone with enough money. He crushed it between his fingers. "Increased security protocols. I want daily sweeps of my office and home." "Yes, sir. And sir, Mr. Blackwood has requested an emergency meeting with you tomorrow morning." Douglas smiled thinly. "I'm sure he has." Dr. Eleanor Sheridan hurried through the crowded terminal at Reagan National Airport, her phone pressed to her ear. At 53, she moved with the energy of someone decades younger, her auburn hair streaked with distinguished silver. cut in a practical bob that framed her face. Her tailored navy pantsuit was wrinkled from the 6-hour flight from San Francisco. "What do you mean they're cutting the funding?" she demanded into the phone. The trial results were exceptional. "We're looking at a 70% improvement rate in patients with severe spinal trauma." Her research assistant's voice came through, strained with frustration. "The committee says the sample size is too small. They want another year of preliminary studies before committing to the full clinical trial." Ellie stopped walking, earning irritated glances from travelers forced to navigate around her. "Another year? Catherine doesn't have another year." "I know, Dr. Sheridan. I'm sorry." After ending the call, Ellie leaned against a pillar, closing her eyes briefly. Her sister Catherine had been an emergency room nurse until a drunk driver shattered her spine 2 years ago. The experimental treatment Ellie had been developing was Catherine's best hope for regaining function below the waist. But without the full clinical trial, Catherine wouldn't qualify for the procedure. A commotion near the gate interrupted her thoughts. A crowd had gathered, and voices were raised in alarm. "Is there a doctor? We need a doctor here." Ellie pushed through the onlookers to find an elderly man collapsed on the floor, his wife kneeling beside him in panic. "I'm a doctor," Ellie announced, dropping to her knees. "What happened?" "It's his heart," the wife sobbed. "He has a condition. His medication is in our checked luggage." Ellie checked his pulse, weak and irregular. His skin was clammy, lips tinged blue. Classic signs of a cardiac event. "Does anyone have aspirin?" she called out. A businessman stepped forward, offering a small pill case. Ellie administered the aspirin, then began CPR when the man lost consciousness completely. "I need an AED," she commanded. An airport employee rushed off to retrieve one. For the next 10 minutes, Ellie worked methodically, drawing on 2 decades of emergency medicine before she'd specialized in neurological research. When the paramedics finally arrived, they found a stabilized patient and a doctor calmly providing a detailed assessment of his condition. "You saved his life," one paramedic told her as they prepared to transport the man. "Another few minutes without intervention," Ellie nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "Just make sure he gets to Washington Memorial. Ask for Dr. Levinson in cardiology. Tell him Ellie Sheridan sent you." As the crowd dispersed, a distinguished woman in her 70s approached Ellie. "That was impressive. Dr. Sheridan." Ellie glanced up, surprised. "Do I know you want Martha Winters?" The woman offered her hand. "We haven't met, but I've followed your research on spinal cord regeneration. Fascinating work." Ellie's guard went up immediately. "You're remarkably well informed about neurological research for a attorney," Martha supplied. "I represent clients with diverse interests. May I buy you a coffee? I have a proposition that might interest you, particularly given your recent funding challenges." 30 minutes later, they sat in an airport lounge, Ellie staring at Martha with disbelief. "Let me get this straight," Ellie said, setting down her coffee cup. "Your client needs a wife for appearances, and you think I'm a candidate. What is this? 1950? Martha smiled thinly. "I assure you, Dr. Sheridan, this is entirely modern. A business arrangement between equals. My client needs to project stability and partnership. You need $10 million for your clinical trial." Ellie laughed without humor. "And all I have to do is pretend to be in love with a stranger. Douglas Harrington is hardly a stranger to Washington circles," Martha replied. "Former Marine Colonel, CEO of Harrington Global Defense. His company develops medical technology for battlefield trauma, among other things. Your research interests align." Ellie's laughter died. "Harrington, the defense contractor. The very same. I know his company's work," Ellie admitted reluctantly. "Their neural interface technology is impressive, but this is absurd. I'm a scientist, not an actress." "Which makes you perfect," Martha countered. "No one would question why a man like Douglas would be attracted to an accomplished, intelligent woman like yourself. The arrangement would be for 1 year, separate bedrooms, but joint public appearances. $10 million transferred to your research foundation. Ellie stood. This conversation is over. Miss Winters. Martha remained seated. Catherine's procedure would cost approximately $2 million. The remaining $8 million would fund your research for 5 years, independent of committee approvals or grant cycles. Complete autonomy. Ellie froze. How do you know about Catherine? As I said, I've followed your work. Your sister's accident was mentioned in several articles about your shift in research focus. Martha extended a business card. Think about it. Dr. Sheridan, 1 year of inconvenience for a lifetime of difference both for Catherine and countless others who could benefit from your research. Ellie took the card automatically, slipping it into her pocket. Goodbye, Ms. Winters. But as she wheeled her suitcase through the terminal, the card seemed to burn in her pocket. $10 million. Complete research autonomy. Catherine walking again. All for a year of pretending. 3 days later, Ellie sat beside Catherine's bed in the rehabilitation center, watching her sister struggle through physical therapy exercises. At 45, Catherine had once been the energetic one running marathons, climbing mountains, volunteering for medical missions in crisis zones. Now, she fought for every inch of movement in her upper body, while her legs remained stubbornly unresponsive. You're brooding again, Catherine observed, lowering the resistance band. Conference that bad? Ellie forced a smile. The conference was fine. It's the funding committee I could throttle. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. They said no. They said not yet, which in bureaucratic terms means probably never. Ellie took her sister's hand. But I'm not giving up. There are other options. Like what, rob a bank? Catherine attempted humor, but the disappointment in her eyes was unmistakable. Ellie hesitated, then reached into her bag and withdrew Martha Winters' business card. Something a bit less illegal, but possibly more insane. She explained the proposition. Catherine listened with increasing disbelief, then burst into laughter. A contract marriage to Douglas Harrington. Ellie. Have you seen the man? He looks like he eats subordinates for breakfast. I'm aware of his reputation, Ellie said dryly. And you'd actually consider this spending a year with a complete stranger, living in his house, playing the devoted wife at parties. Ellie looked down at their joined hands. For $10 million towards spinal research, for the chance to get you into the trial immediately. Yes, I'd consider it. Catherine's laughter faded. Ellie, no, not for me. I can't let you. It's not just for you. Ellie interrupted. It's for everyone like you. Do you know how many spinal patients are waiting for treatments that never get past committee reviews? How many promising therapies die because some bureaucrat decides the potential market isn't large enough? But marriage, even a fake one. Catherine shook her head. After what Robert did to you? Ellie winced at the mention of her ex-husband. 25 years of marriage ended when she discovered Robert's affair with a pharmaceutical representative half his age. The divorce had been finalized just months before Catherine's accident. This would be nothing like a real marriage, Ellie said firmly. Just a business arrangement with clear terms and a definite end date. And when it's over, what then? Ellie squared her shoulders. Then I have a fully funded research center. You have a chance to walk again, and Mr. Harrington keeps his company. Everyone wins. Catherine studied her sister's face. You've already decided it, haven't you? I have a meeting with him tomorrow, Ellie admitted, just to discuss possibilities. Well, Catherine sighed, at least take some pepper spray and make sure someone knows where you are. The Harrington Global Defense Headquarters dominated the Rosslyn skyline, a gleaming monument to modern defense technology. Ellie felt distinctly out of place as she presented her visitor's badge at the executive floor security desk. Her charcoal pantsuit, the nicest she owned, suddenly seemed inadequate among the power suits and military precision that surrounded her. Dr. Sheridan, a voice called. Martha Winters approached with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. Thank you for reconsidering. Colonel Harrington is expecting us. Martha led her through a labyrinth of corridors to a conference room with sweeping views of the Potomac. Douglas Harrington stood as they entered. Every inch the military commander despite his civilian attire. His silver hair and weathered face spoke of experience, while his posture radiated authority. What caught Ellie off guard were his eyes steel blue and intensely perceptive, as if he could read every doubt crossing her mind. Dr. Sheridan? He extended his hand. His grip was firm but not dominating. Thank you for coming. Colonel, she acknowledged, determined to match his formality. Please, Douglas is fine. I haven't been Colonel Harrington in 15 years. Then I'm Ellie, she replied, taking the seat he indicated. Martha placed a thick folder on the conference table. I've outlined the proposed arrangement. 1 year of marriage, beginning immediately, joint public appearances at social and business functions, residence at Stonehaven, the Harrington family estate, separate living quarters. Of course. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Estate, I was thinking more along the lines of a condo. Stonehaven is more secure, Douglas explained, and more believable as a marital residence. It has an east and west wing. You would have complete privacy in the east wing. The financial terms, Martha continued, include $10 million transferred to the Sheridan Neurological Research Foundation upon signing, plus a monthly allowance for personal expenses. I don't need an allowance, Ellie said firmly. For appearances, Douglas clarified. Designer clothes, jewelry appropriate to certain functions. Martha can assist with selections if needed. Ellie bristled. I'm capable of dressing myself. A hint of amusement flickered in Douglas's eyes. I'm sure you are, but Washington society has specific expectations for the wife of a defense contractor. And speaking of appearances, Martha interjected, we'll need a convincing story of how you met and fell in love, something that explains a whirlwind romance and quick marriage. I've been reviewing your background, Douglas said, opening a file of his own. You served as a military doctor during Operation Desert Storm. I did, Ellie confirmed, surprised he'd researched her military service. Field Hospital, 86th Combat Support Hospital? Douglas nodded. We could have crossed paths there. It's plausible enough, and would explain reconnecting years later. A Gulf War romance rekindled, Martha mused. Compelling and patriotic. The media will love it. Ellie shifted uncomfortably. This all seems very calculated. It is, Douglas acknowledged without apology. I need to secure the Archer contract to keep control of my company. You need funding for your research. This arrangement accomplishes both objectives with minimal complications. And what about physical affection? Ellie asked bluntly. What exactly does this arrangement require? Martha cleared her throat. Public displays of affection should be convincing but tasteful. Hand-holding, the occasional kiss, nothing beyond what would be appropriate in public settings. Douglas met her gaze directly. I assure you, Dr. Sheridan, your personal boundaries will be respected at all times. Ellie held his gaze, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she turned her attention to the contract. I'd like my own attorney to review this before signing. Of course, Martha agreed. We anticipated that. She slid a second copy across the table. Take all the time you need. Ellie stood. I'll have an answer for you by tomorrow. As she gathered her belongings, Douglas spoke again. Dr. Sheridan, I reviewed your research on neural regeneration after trauma. It's impressive work. If successful, it could benefit thousands of veterans. The genuine respect in his voice caught her off guard. Thank you. One more thing, he added. What made you decide to consider this proposal? Martha can be persuasive, but this arrangement is unconventional. Ellie hesitated, then decided on honesty. My sister Catherine. She was a trauma nurse before a car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Your money would get her into the experimental treatment program immediately. Douglas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Family is a powerful motivator. Yes, Ellie agreed. It is. As Martha escorted her back to the elevator, Ellie found herself thinking that Douglas Harrington wasn't at all what she'd expected. Less the cold corporate tyrant, more the calculated strategist. Those penetrating blue eyes had seen combat, loss, and probably more than their share of betrayal. Yet there had been something almost vulnerable in his question about her motivation, as if he needed to understand her reasoning to trust her. In the taxi heading back to her hotel, Ellie stared at the contract in her lap. The clinical part of her brain, the scientist who weighed evidence and calculated risk, knew this was the logical solution to her funding crisis. $10 million could change everything for her research, for Catherine, for countless patients. The woman who'd been betrayed after 25 years of marriage wasn't so easily convinced. Shafwana. The following morning, Ellie sat across from Douglas in his private office. The signed contract between them. Her attorney had found the terms surprisingly favorable, with clear protections for her autonomy and reputation. The transfer to your research foundation has been completed, Douglas informed her, sliding a tablet across the desk showing the transaction confirmation. $10 million, as agreed. Ellie felt a momentary vertigo at the figure, more research funding than she'd managed to secure in her entire career. The marriage license requires a brief ceremony, Martha explained. We've arranged for a justice of the peace this afternoon. Nothing elaborate. That's fine, Ellie agreed. The sooner we begin, the sooner this year will be complete. There is one more matter, Douglas said, his tone shifting slightly. Security. After you left yesterday, there was an incident at the office. Someone attempted to access sensitive files. I have reason to believe Richard is involved. Your brother-in-law, Ellie recalled Martha mentioning him as the primary threat to Douglas's position. Douglas nodded. Richard has never accepted that Elizabeth left her shares to me rather than him. He's been attempting to undermine my leadership since her death. Is there any danger? Ellie asked, suddenly alert. Not physical danger, Douglas assured her. Richard operates through corporate maneuvering and character assassination. Not violence, but it does mean our security protocols at Stonehaven will be extensive. I apologize for any inconvenience this causes. I understand, Ellie said, though privately she wondered what she was really getting herself into. When do we move to Stonehaven? Tonight, after the ceremony, Martha answered. We've arranged for your belongings to be packed and transported from your hotel. I'll need to visit Catherine at the rehabilitation center tomorrow, Ellie said firmly. To explain the situation and arrange her transfer to the treatment program? Of course, Douglas agreed. I'll have a car and security detail ready whenever you need them. The civil ceremony was as brief and businesslike as promised. No flowers, no music, just the necessary legal declarations in a private room at the courthouse. Douglas slipped a platinum band onto Ellie's finger, elegant but not ostentatious, perfectly sized as if he'd known her measurements. She similarly placed a matching band on his left hand, trying not to notice how it replaced the slight indentation where another ring had clearly been worn for many years. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, the Justice of the Peace announced with a smile that neither returned. As they exited the courthouse, Martha handed Ellie a folder. Your new identification and credit cards. We'll handle the name change paperwork for your professional credentials, though you're welcome to continue using Sheridan for publications. Ellie nodded, the reality of what she'd done finally sinking in. She was now, legally, Eleanor Harrington. For the next 365 days, her life would be inextricably linked with the man beside her, a virtual stranger despite the thorough background checks they'd both conducted. There's a photographer across the street, Douglas murmured, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of her back. Smile, Mrs. Harrington. Our first public appearance begins now. Ellie forced a smile, leaning slightly into Douglas as if they were a couple genuinely happy about their new marriage. His arm slipped around her waist, the gesture appearing natural and affectionate to any observer. The warmth of his body against hers was unexpected, as was her body's instinctive response to the contact. Ellie quickly attributed it to simple biology. It had been a long time since anyone had touched her with even simulated affection. The black SUV that awaited them was clearly armored, with tinted windows and a driver who moved with military precision. As they settled into the back seat, Douglas maintained their physical connection, his arms still around her shoulders. "The photographer will follow," he explained quietly. "We should maintain the appearance until we're clear." Ellie nodded, uncomfortably aware of his cologne subtle and masculine, with notes of sandalwood. "How long before we reach Stonehaven?" "About 40 minutes, traffic permitting," Douglas replied. "It's in Virginia, just outside Great Falls." As the SUV merged into traffic, Ellie noticed a black sedan pull out behind them. "We're being followed." Douglas glanced in the side mirror. "Yes, not the photographer. Different vehicle." His posture shifted subtly, becoming more alert. He pressed an intercom button. "James, we have a tail. Black Audi, 2 car lengths back." "I see it, sir," the driver responded. "Implementing evasive protocol 3. The SUV smoothly accelerated, weaving through traffic with practiced precision. Ellie instinctively gripped the door handle as they took a sharp turn onto a side street. "Is this normal for you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Occasional surveillance is part of the business," Douglas replied, his tone calm but his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. "Usually industrial espionage, sometimes foreign intelligence services interested in our technology." The Audi was still behind them, keeping pace despite James's expert driving. Douglas reached inside his jacket and removed a handgun, checking it discreetly. "You carry a gun?" Ellie couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Former Marine, defense contractor with high-level clearance, and recent target of corporate espionage. Douglas listed matter-of-factly, "Yes, I carry a gun." The SUV swerved suddenly as the Audi accelerated, attempting to pull alongside them. The reinforced glass of Douglas's window spiderwebbed as something struck it, not a bullet, but some kind of projectile. "Down," Douglas commanded, pushing Ellie below the window line while simultaneously drawing his weapon. "James, get us to Stonehaven. Security Protocol Alpha." The driver executed a perfect J-turn, causing the pursuing vehicle to shoot past them. As they accelerated in the opposite direction, 2 more black SUVs appeared, boxing in the Audi. "Our security team," Douglas explained, keeping Ellie shielded with his body. "They've been following at a distance." Ellie's heart raced, adrenaline flooding her system. This was supposed to be a straightforward business arrangement: pretend to be married, attend some parties, collect her research funding. No one had mentioned car chases and gunfire. "Are you all right?" Douglas asked, his voice close to her ear. Ellie realized she was practically in his lap, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She straightened, trying to regain her composure. "I'm fine. Just not what I expected from my wedding day." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Douglas's eyes. "Welcome to life in the defense industry, Dr. Sheridan." "Ellie," she corrected automatically. "If we're married, even on paper, you should probably use my first name." "Ellie," he repeated, the name sounding strangely intimate in his deep voice. "Welcome to Stonehaven." The SUV had turned onto a private road leading to an impressive set of iron gates. Beyond them, Ellie could see what Douglas had modestly called an estate. Stonehaven was, in reality, a mansion, a grand stone structure that looked like it belonged in the English countryside rather than suburban Virginia. Manicured grounds stretched in all directions, with ancient oak trees providing natural privacy screens. "This is where you live?" Ellie asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Alone. It's been in the Harrington family for 4 generations," Douglas replied as the gates opened automatically. "After Elizabeth died, I considered selling it. Too many memories. But security considerations made it practical to keep." The driveway curved through immaculate gardens before stopping at the main entrance. Massive double doors flanked by stone columns. A staff member appeared immediately to open the car door. "Mr. Harrington," the man nodded respectfully. "We received the security alert. The perimeter is secured. Thank you. Reynolds. Douglas helped Ellie from the car, his hand resting lightly on her elbow. This is Dr. Sheridan Mrs. Harrington. She'll be residing in the East Wing. Reynolds showed no surprise at this announcement, merely nodding with the same professional detachment. Your luggage arrived this morning. Ma'am, Ms. Peters has arranged everything in your suite. Ellie stepped into an entrance hall that could have housed her entire apartment. Marble floors, a sweeping staircase, and artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a private residence. I'll show you to your wing, Douglas offered, guiding her toward the eastern corridor. Dinner is at 7, but I understand if you'd prefer to eat alone after today's excitement. That might be best, Ellie agreed, still processing the events of the past hour. I have research notes to review for Catherine's treatment protocol. Douglas nodded. Your suite has a private study fully equipped with whatever technology you might need. If anything is missing, Miss Peters can arrange it. The East Wing proved to be essentially a self-contained apartment within the mansion. A spacious bedroom with an adjoining sitting room, a luxurious bathroom with both shower and soaking tub, a fully equipped study, and even a small kitchenette. This should provide adequate privacy, Douglas said, standing at the threshold rather than entering the space. Your keycard accesses all common areas of the house as well as the East Wing. My quarters in the West Wing are private, as is my study off the main library. Understood, Ellie nodded, appreciating his clear establishment of boundaries. Thank you, Douglas hesitated, then added. The incident in the car, that's not typical. I apologize if it alarmed you. I served in a war zone. Douglas, Ellie reminded him. It takes more than a car chase to rattle me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Of course. Good evening. Then, after he left, Ellie explored her new living space. Her belongings had indeed been unpacked and arranged with surprising thoughtfulness. Her medical textbooks and research journals lined the study shelves. Her clothes hung in the walk-in closet, supplemented by several new outfits with designer labels still attached. On the desk sat a framed photograph of her and Catherine from before the accident, their arms around each other as they stood at the summit of Old Rag Mountain. Ellie sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of her decision finally hitting her. She legally married a man she barely knew, a man who apparently lived in a fortress and carried a gun as casually as others carried cell phones, a man whose enemies were bold enough to attack his vehicle in broad daylight. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered to the empty room. But then she thought of Catherine, of the possibility of her walking again, of the research that could help thousands of patients with spinal injuries. $10 million, complete research autonomy, 1 year. She could do anything for 1 year. Ellie opened her laptop and began reviewing the treatment protocols for Catherine's admission to the experimental program. Tomorrow, she would tell her sister about her new husband and arrange her transfer to Washington Memorial's specialized neurology unit. One unexpected car chase wasn't going to derail her plans. As she worked, however, she couldn't shake the memory of Douglas's arm around her, protective and solid, the way he'd shielded her without hesitation when danger threatened. For a marriage that existed only on paper, it had felt disturbingly real in that moment. Just biology, she reminded herself firmly. Just instinct and adrenaline. Nothing more. The first 3 days at Stonehaven established a routine of careful avoidance. Ellie took breakfast early in her kitchenette, spent mornings at the hospital with Catherine, afternoons in her study reviewing research, and evenings dining alone on trays delivered by the discreet household staff. Douglas seemed equally committed to maintaining their separate lives, leaving early for the office and returning late. On the fourth morning, however, Ellie encountered him in the main kitchen as she ventured out for coffee. He sat at the breakfast bar reading a tablet, dressed for running in track pants and a Marine Corps t-shirt that revealed arms still muscled from regular training. Without his usual suit, he looked different, less the corporate executive, more the military man he'd once been. "Good morning," she offered, moving toward the coffee machine. Douglas glanced up, seeming momentarily surprised by her presence. "Good morning," Did you sleep well? Well enough, Ellie replied, pouring coffee into a mug emblazoned with the Marine Corps emblem, the only one in the cabinet not made of fine china. The East Wing is very comfortable. I'm glad. Douglas returned to his tablet, apparently considering the exchange complete. Ellie hesitated, then decided direct communication was best. We should probably discuss our first public appearance. The Foundation Gala is in 5 weeks, but surely we'll need to be seen together before then. Douglas set down his tablet. Yes, there's a dinner at the British Embassy next week. The Defense Secretary will be there, along with key members of the Archer Contract Committee. All right, I'll need to know what's expected. Dress code, who I should know, topics to avoid. Martha will brief you, Douglas assured her. She's arranging for a stylist to visit tomorrow. The embassy event is formal. Ellie bristled slightly at the implication she needed styling help. I do know how to dress for formal events. I'm sure you do, Douglas replied evenly. But Washington diplomatic functions have specific expectations. Martha is merely being thorough. An awkward silence fell between them. Ellie sipped her coffee, searching for neutral conversation. I arranged Catherine's transfer to Washington Memorial yesterday. The experimental program director was surprisingly accommodating when he learned of the Sheridan Foundation's new funding. I'm glad to hear it, Douglas said, and she was surprised to detect genuine interest. When does her treatment begin? Next week. They're starting with neural mapping to identify viable pathways below the injury site. Douglas nodded. HGD developed some of the imaging technology they'll likely use. The neural interface mapping system was originally designed for prosthetic applications in wounded veterans. Yes, I'm familiar with it, Ellie acknowledged. Your company's work in neural interfacing is impressive. I cited it in several of my papers. Something that might have been pride flickered across Douglas's features. If Catherine's doctors need any specialized equipment, let me know. HGD can expedite access. Thank you, Ellie said, genuinely appreciative. That's kind. Douglas stood, his impressive height more noticeable without the formality of his office setting. I'm heading out for my morning run. The security team maintains a perimeter around the property. You're safe to walk the grounds if you'd like some air. After he left, Ellie remained in the kitchen, oddly unsettled by the brief interaction. Douglas Harrington was a puzzle formal and distant one moment, unexpectedly considerate the next. His offer regarding Catherine's treatment seemed genuine, beyond what their contract required. Later that morning, as Ellie walked the expansive grounds, she found herself drawn to a secluded rose garden behind the main house. The late spring blooms were spectacular, clearly tended with expertise and care. A stone bench nestled among the flowers offered a perfect view of both the garden and the distant Blue Ridge Mountains. Elizabeth designed it, a voice said behind her. Ellie turned to find Douglas standing at the garden entrance, still in his running clothes, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool morning. Your wife, Ellie asked, though she knew the answer. Douglas nodded, approaching slowly. She spent hours here, said it was where she could think most clearly. He stopped beside a particularly vibrant yellow rose. These were her favorite, peace roses, hardy enough to survive Virginia winters. She said, the grief in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Ellie felt a sudden sympathy for this man who had lost his partner of presumably many years. It's beautiful, she said softly. Thank you for allowing me to enjoy it. Douglas seemed to catch himself, straightening as if remembering their arrangement was business, not personal. The entire property is at your disposal, except my private quarters. That was our agreement. Yes, of course. Ellie nodded, retreating behind formality as well. I should get back to my research. As she passed him, Douglas spoke again. The Foundation Gala. Elizabeth always handled the details, the guest list, the seating arrangements, the auction items. Ellie paused, hearing the unspoken request. Would you like me to review those elements as your wife? It would be expected. Relief flickered across his features. Martha has the files. I would appreciate your input. I'll speak with her this afternoon, Ellie promised. It was, after all, part of their arrangement she would play the role of wife, including the social responsibilities that came with it. Walking back to the house, Ellie reflected on the brief exchange. For a moment, Douglas had lowered his guard, allowing her to glimpse the man behind the carefully maintained facade, the widower who still tended his late wife's rose garden, the military commander who now fought corporate battles instead of physical ones, the man who carried grief like another piece of tactical gear, essential but heavy. Their contract specified no emotional involvement, but Ellie was beginning to realize that maintaining complete emotional distance might be more challenging than she'd anticipated. Not because of any romantic interest she'd firmly closed that door after Robert's betrayal, but because of simple human empathy. Douglas Harrington was not just a contract or a funding source. He was a person with his own history, his own wounds, his own reasons for this unusual arrangement. And despite her best intentions, Ellie was becoming curious about those reasons beyond what Martha had explained. The scientist in her couldn't help but observe, analyze, question. Why would a man with Douglas's resources and position need a contract wife? Surely there were women in Washington society who would genuinely want to marry him. Why choose this elaborate charade instead, as she reached the East Wing? Ellie firmly redirected her thoughts to Catherine's treatment plan. She hadn't signed up to solve the puzzle of Douglas Harrington's personal choices. She had a sister to heal, research to conduct, and a contract to fulfill. Everything else was irrelevant. 1 year, just 1 year of her life, and then she would return to her real world, $10 million richer, and with Catherine hopefully walking again. Simple, straightforward, uncomplicated. If only she could convince herself it would stay that way. The British Embassy gleamed with diplomatic opulence, crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, and Washington's power elite in formal attire. Ellie stood beside Douglas at the entrance, hyper-aware of his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The midnight blue gown Martha's stylist had selected fit perfectly, its elegant simplicity appropriate for a neurosurgeon turned researcher, while still marking her as part of Washington's upper echelon. "Ready?" Douglas murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Ellie nodded, slipping into the role they'd rehearsed. Loving wife, supportive partner, the brilliant doctor who had captured the heart of the famously reserved defense contractor. "Ambassador Wilson at 2 o'clock. Douglas guided her smoothly through the crowd. "Key supporter of the Archer Initiative. His wife is on the board of the Children's Medical Center." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and carefully crafted small talk. Ellie found herself drawing on skills honed during years of medical conferences and grant presentations. She spoke knowledgeably about her research when asked, deftly redirected conversations from classified areas of Douglas's work, and maintained just the right amount of physical contact to suggest a comfortable intimacy without impropriety. Douglas, for his part, played his role with similar precision. His hand rarely left her waist or elbow, and he introduced her with evident pride. To any observer, they appeared to be exactly what they claimed, a power couple united by both professional respect and personal affection. "You're a natural at this," Douglas commented during a brief moment alone by the champagne fountain. "I was concerned the diplomatic circuit might be overwhelming. I've navigated hospital politics for 20 years, Ellie replied with a small smile. "This isn't so different, just better champagne and fewer discussions of bowel obstructions." A genuine chuckle escaped Douglas the first time she'd heard him laugh. The sound was unexpectedly warm, transforming his usually stern features. "Colonel Harrington," a smooth voice interrupted, "how unlike you to find amusement at these tedious affairs." They turned to find a man in his mid-50s approaching, his tuxedo impeccable, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Though Ellie had never met him, she recognized Richard Blackwood immediately from Martha's detailed briefing materials. "Richard," Douglas acknowledged, his posture subtly shifting to something more defensive. "I wasn't aware you were on the embassy guest list." "Last-minute addition," Richard replied, his gaze sliding to Ellie with unconcealed assessment. And this must be the mysterious new Mrs. Harrington. Washington is buzzing with speculation about Douglas's whirlwind romance. Dr. Eleanor Sheridan Harrington. Ellie extended her hand, meeting his calculating stare directly. Though there's nothing mysterious about reconnecting with an old friend during life's second act, Richard's handshake was brief and cool. Fascinating. And what exactly attracted you to my brother-in-law? Doctor, his charming personality, his extensive art collection, or perhaps his controlling interest in a multi-billion-dollar defense company? Richard, Douglas's voice carried a warning edge. Actually, Ellie interjected smoothly, it was his dedication to advancing medical technology for trauma patients. As a former military doctor, I find his commitment to saving lives rather than merely taking them quite compelling. She smiled pleasantly. But the art collection is lovely too. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. How admirable. Though I wonder what Elizabeth would think of her replacement appearing so soon after. Dr. Mason, Douglas interrupted, nodding to an approaching elderly gentleman. Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet my wife, Dr. Sheridan. She's pioneering some fascinating work in spinal regeneration that might interest you. As Douglas smoothly maneuvered them away from Richard, Ellie felt his hand tense against her back. The encounter had affected him more than his expression revealed. I apologize for Richard, he said quietly once they were safely engaged with Dr. Mason. He's still bitter about Elizabeth's decision to leave her shares to me rather than him. No apology necessary, Ellie assured him. Martha briefed me thoroughly on your brother-in-law's charming personality. The evening continued with more introductions, more strategic conversations. Ellie found herself seated beside the Secretary of Defense at dinner, while Douglas was placed across the table with a senior Pentagon official. Throughout the meal, she could feel Richard's gaze from several tables away, watching their every interaction with suspicious calculation. Your husband speaks highly of your research. Dr. Sheridan, the secretary commented as dessert was served. He suggested your neural regeneration techniques might have applications for our Wounded Warriors program. That's certainly my hope, Ellie replied, warming to her favorite topic. The preliminary results show particular promise for incomplete spinal injuries like those often sustained in combat scenarios. The department would be interested in seeing a formal presentation, he continued, perhaps at the Harrington Foundation Gala next month. I'd be honored, Ellie said, genuinely pleased at the opportunity. Douglas and I both believe in leveraging private sector innovation for public benefit, particularly for those who've served. The secretary nodded approvingly. Refreshing perspective. Some defense contractors forget the human element of our work. He lowered his voice slightly. Between us, Colonel Harrington seems different since your marriage. More engaged. Less isolated. It suits him. Ellie wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected observation. Marriage has a way of changing perspectives, she offered diplomatically. Later, as they prepared to depart, Douglas guided her toward the coat check. You were magnificent, he murmured. The secretary is firmly in our corner for the Archer contract now. Glad I could help, Ellie replied, trying not to focus on the warmth of his hand at her waist or the subtle spice of his cologne. Though I suspect Richard wasn't convinced by our performance, Richard has never been convinced of anything that doesn't directly benefit Richard, Douglas said dryly. But the opinion that matters is the secretary's, and you've thoroughly charmed him. Outside, their car waited at the curb. The night air was unexpectedly chilly for late spring, and Ellie shivered slightly in her evening gown. Without comment, Douglas removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was smooth, natural, exactly what a caring husband would do. For the benefit of watching eyes, Ellie told herself, just maintaining their cover. The warmth of his jacket enveloped her, carrying his scent and the lingering heat of his body. Something fluttered in her stomach, a reaction she firmly attributed to the evening's tension and the champagne she'd consumed. As they settled into the back seat of the SUV, Douglas loosened his bow tie with a barely audible sigh of relief. The small action humanized him, reminding Ellie that beneath the perfect performance, he too was playing a role that might not come naturally. "Thank you," he said quietly as the car pulled away from the embassy, "for handling Richard gracefully and for impressing the secretary. Just fulfilling my end of our arrangement," Ellie replied, but without the clinical detachment she'd intended. Something about the genuine appreciation in his voice made it difficult to maintain emotional distance. They rode in silence for several minutes, the Washington monuments gliding past, illuminated against the night sky. Finally, Douglas spoke again. "The secretary mentioned your presentation at the gala. I should have consulted you before suggesting it. If you're uncomfortable with the idea—" "No, it's a good opportunity," Ellie interrupted. "Exposure for the research is part of why I agreed to this arrangement." Douglas nodded. "Still, I should have discussed it with you first. This partnership, even as a business arrangement, requires better communication than I've demonstrated." Partnership, the word hung between them, more meaningful than contract or arrangement, yet less intimate than marriage. It acknowledged a mutual endeavor with shared goals and responsibilities. "I appreciate that," Ellie said carefully. "And I agree. Better communication would benefit us both." Douglas turned slightly to face her. In the dimly lit car, his expression was softer than usual. The stern lines of authority relaxed after the evening's performance. "Perhaps we could have dinner together tomorrow," he suggested, "to discuss the foundation gala planning and establish better protocols for our public appearances." "I'd like that," Ellie found herself saying. "Catherine has tests until late afternoon, but I should be back by 7. 7 then. The small dining room, not the formal one. A simple dinner between business partners," Ellie told herself. Nothing more than practical planning for their continued arrangement. Yet as she glanced at Douglas's profile against the passing lights, she couldn't quite ignore the inexplicable flutter of anticipation in her chest. Just biology, she reminded herself firmly. Just basic human response to an objectively attractive man who had been surprisingly considerate tonight. Nothing that would complicate their perfectly straightforward contract. Nothing at all. The small dining room at Stonehaven was an exercise in understated elegance. Unlike the formal dining hall that could seat 20, this intimate space featured a round table by a bay window overlooking the rose garden. Now softly illuminated by landscape lighting, candles flickered on the table, casting a warm glow over the fine china and crystal. Ellie paused in the doorway, momentarily taken aback by the romantic setting. This wasn't the business dinner she'd envisioned. "I hope this is acceptable," Douglas said, appearing beside her. He changed from his office attire into charcoal slacks and a blue cashmere sweater that matched his eyes. "The staff assumed, given our supposed relationship—" "It's fine," Ellie assured him, understanding the dilemma. The household staff believed their marriage was genuine. Too many changes to normal routines might raise suspicions. "It's lovely, actually." Douglas pulled out her chair with military precision. "Wine, it's a Bordeaux from Elizabeth's collection. She was something of an expert." "And thank you." Ellie accepted the glass, noting how often Elizabeth's preferences still shaped life at Stonehaven. The ghost of his late wife seemed to occupy every corner of the estate. As the first course was served, a delicate mushroom bisque, Douglas unfolded a tablet from beside his plate. "I've compiled the guest list for the gala based on previous year's attendance. I'd appreciate your input on seating arrangements, particularly for the Pentagon officials who expressed interest in your research." Ellie smiled slightly. Even with candles and fine wine, Douglas approached their dinner with tactical precision. "Of course, though I should mention, I've invited Catherine to attend if she's feeling strong enough. The initial treatments have shown promising results." "I'm glad to hear it," Douglas said, and Ellie was surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. "I've arranged for a specialist from Johns Hopkins to consult on her case, Dr. Abrams. His work with neural implants complements your regeneration techniques." Ellie set down her spoon, genuinely touched. "That's extraordinarily thoughtful, Douglas." The contract doesn't require you to take such personal interest in Catherine's treatment. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his perpetually squared shoulders. I understand the importance of family, Ellie, and your sister's recovery is clearly your priority. Before she could respond, a sharp crash from the kitchen interrupted the moment. Douglas was on his feet instantly, hand moving instinctively toward his hip where Ellie suspected he normally carried his weapon. "Stay here," he ordered, voice shifting to military command. "I'm coming with you," Ellie countered, already standing. "I'm a doctor. Remember, if someone's hurt." Another crash, followed by shouting. Douglas moved with surprising speed for a man his age. Ellie close behind. They burst into the kitchen to find two security guards restraining a young man in his early 30s. Blood streamed from a cut on the intruder's forehead, and shattered dishes littered the floor. "Andrew." Douglas's voice held shock and something else, a pained recognition. The young man looked up, his features a younger echo of Douglas's same strong jaw, same steel blue eyes, now blazing with anger. "Surprised to see me, Dad? Or should I call you Colonel now that I'm just another security threat to be neutralized?" Ellie glanced between them, understanding dawning. This was Andrew Harrington Douglas's son, who Martha had mentioned was deployed overseas with special forces. Clearly, he'd returned unexpectedly. "Stand down," Douglas ordered the security team. "This is my son." The guards released Andrew immediately, backing away with professional deference. Andrew straightened his rumpled jacket, military issue beneath a civilian coat, and wiped blood from his eye. "Your watchdogs tackle everyone who comes to visit, or just family?" he asked bitterly. "You triggered 3 perimeter alarms trying to enter through the service entrance." Douglas replied evenly. "Standard protocol for a potential intruder. Forgive me for not calling ahead. Satellite phones are scarce in classified locations." Andrew's gaze shifted to Ellie, narrowing with suspicion. "And who's this new assistant, or has Richard finally convinced you to hire personal security?" "This is Eleanor," Douglas said, his voice carefully controlled. "My wife." Andrew's expression would have been comical under different circumstances, mouth open, eyes wide with disbelief. "Your what?" "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private," Ellie suggested quietly, noting the kitchen staff's uncomfortable hovering. "And I should look at that cut. Head wounds bleed dramatically, but are rarely serious." 20 minutes later, they sat in Douglas's study, a masculine space of leather and oak, walls lined with military memorabilia and engineering techs. Ellie finished applying a butterfly bandage to Andrew's forehead, her medical training automatically kicking in, despite the tension crackling between father and son. "So," Andrew said, wincing slightly as Ellie cleaned the wound, "when exactly did my father decide to remarry last I checked? He was married to Harrington Global and the ghost of my mother." "Andrew," Douglas's voice carried a warning. "It's all right," Ellie interjected, meeting Andrew's hostile gaze directly. "Your father and I reconnected recently after knowing each other during Desert Storm. I understand this must be a shock," Andrew snorted. "A shock my father, who hasn't had a personal relationship since Mom died, suddenly marries a woman I've never heard of while I'm deployed. Yeah, you could call it a shock. You've been incommunicado for 8 months," Douglas pointed out. "There's a lot you haven't heard." Clearly, Andrew's eyes narrowed, like the fact that Richard is trying to push you out of the company, that your PTSD evaluation was leaked to the board, that there's suddenly heightened security around Stonehaven. I had to hear all this from my Pentagon contact, not my own father. Ellie finished with the bandage and stepped back, sensing the conversation had moved into territory that required privacy. "I should give you two some time to talk." Douglas nodded gratefully. "Thank you." "Ellie." As she closed the study door behind her, Ellie heard Andrew's voice rise again. "Ellie, since when do you use first names with anyone? Who is she really? Dad. What's going on?" Walking back to the East Wing, Ellie felt a surprising pang of sympathy for Douglas. The relationship with his son was clearly strained, and her presence complicated an already difficult dynamic. From Andrew's reaction, Douglas had indeed been isolated since his wife's death, focused solely on the company Elizabeth had left in his care, which made their marriage all the more shocking to those who knew him well. Ellie settled in her sitting room with research notes, but found herself unable to focus. The evening had revealed layers to Douglas she hadn't anticipated: his thoughtfulness regarding Catherine, the carefully maintained family traditions at Stonehaven, and now the complicated relationship with his son. The contract marriage that had seemed so straightforward on paper was becoming increasingly complex in practice. Every day revealed new connections, new complications, new aspects of Douglas Harrington that couldn't be neatly contained in contract clauses. Morning found Ellie in the kitchen again, seeking coffee before heading to the hospital for Catherine's treatment session. To her surprise, Andrew sat at the breakfast bar, military duffel at his feet, nursing a mug of black coffee. His expression when she entered was guarded but less openly hostile than the previous evening. "Good morning," Ellie offered, moving to the coffee machine. "Morning," Andrew replied, watching her movements with assessment that reminded her of his father. "You're up early." "Hospital rounds," Ellie explained, pouring coffee into what she now thought of as her Marine Corps mug. "My sister Catherine is in an experimental treatment program at Washington Memorial." Something in Andrew's expression shifted slightly. "The spinal regeneration research. That's your work, isn't it?" Ellie nodded, surprised by his knowledge. "Yes. Catherine was paralyzed in a car accident 2 years ago." Andrew studied her over his coffee. "Dad mentioned your research last night. Said it could help a lot of wounded warriors coming back from the sandbox." The term for combat zones was familiar from Ellie's military service. "That's the hope. The neural pathways remain viable much longer than previously thought. With the right stimulation and regenerative environment, function can be restored in many cases." "Dad also said you served as a trauma doc during Desert Storm." Ellie sipped her coffee, recognizing the subtle interrogation technique. 86th Combat Support Hospital, Field Trauma Unit. "Where you supposedly met my father." "Yes." Ellie maintained eye contact, knowing this was a critical moment for their cover story. Though "met" is perhaps too formal. "I treated casualties from his unit after an ambush. He wasn't conscious for most of it." Andrew's eyes narrowed slightly. "He never mentioned you before." "Why would he?" Ellie countered reasonably. "I was one of dozens of doctors who treated hundreds of Marines. We reconnected at a Veterans Medical Symposium 3 months ago, and suddenly decided to get married." Skepticism dripped from every word. Ellie decided a partial truth might be most effective. "Life at our age teaches you not to waste time once you know what you want. We both lost years to other priorities, me to my research, your father to rebuilding the company after your mother's death." She set down her mug. "I understand your suspicion, Andrew. I'd feel the same in your position, but perhaps consider that your father deserves some happiness after 8 years of solitude." Andrew's expression remained guarded, but something in his posture relaxed marginally. "He does, which is why I find the timing interesting, right when Richard is making his move against Dad's leadership. Sometimes personal happiness and professional advantage align," Ellie said carefully. "The board was concerned about your father's isolation. Our relationship addresses that concern while being genuinely fulfilling for us both." Before Andrew could respond, Douglas entered the kitchen, already dressed for the office in a perfectly tailored gray suit. He paused briefly, taking in the tableau of his son and wife, apparently in civil conversation. "Morning," he offered, moving to the coffee pot. "Sleep well?" "Fine," Andrew replied, a wealth of unresolved tension in that single word. "Ellie was just telling me about her sister's treatment. Catherine is showing promising early response," Douglas said, pouring coffee with military precision. "The neural mapping yesterday identified viable pathways below the injury site." Ellie couldn't hide her surprise at his detailed knowledge. "You've been monitoring her case." Douglas met her gaze directly. "I asked Dr. Abrams to keep me informed. I hope that's not overstepping." "No," Ellie said softly. It's thoughtful. Thank you. Andrew watched this exchange with keen interest, his eyes moving between them as if reassessing his initial conclusions. I've seen similar injuries in Special Forces operators, he offered unexpectedly. One of my team took shrapnel to the spine in Kandahar last year. The VA doctors weren't optimistic. The VA is chronically behind on adopting experimental protocols, Ellie said, professional passion overriding the awkwardness of the moment. If he's interested in assessment for the program, I could arrange it. Andrew's eyebrows rose slightly. That's generous. Thank you. Douglas checked his watch. Security will drive you to the hospital. Ellie, I've asked James to remain with you today. Is that necessary? Ellie asked. The hospital has its own security. After the incident during our drive to Stonehaven, I'd prefer to err on the side of caution, Douglas replied. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. Incident. Andrew immediately focused on this new information. What incident? Someone followed our car from the courthouse, Douglas explained briefly. Likely industrial espionage related to the Archer contract. Nothing unusual. Someone shot at your car and you call it nothing unusual. Andrew's voice rose with disbelief. Dad, what the hell is going on? Language, Douglas corrected automatically, an echo of parental authority that made him seem suddenly older. And it wasn't a shooting, just surveillance that became too aggressive. I should get going, Ellie interjected, sensing another father-son confrontation brewing. Catherine's treatment starts at 9. I'll walk you out, Douglas offered, setting down his coffee. In the foyer, away from Andrew's scrutinizing gaze, Douglas spoke quietly. I apologize for the tension. Andrew and I have communication challenges. His sudden appearance complicates our arrangement. He's concerned about you, Ellie observed. That suggests he cares. Despite the friction, Douglas's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps, though his timing is suspiciously aligned with Richard's moves against me, Andrew and Richard have maintained contact over the years, despite my objections. You think your son is working with Richard against you? Ellie couldn't hide her dismay at the thought. I think family loyalties are complex, Douglas replied carefully. And Richard has always been skilled at manipulation. Just be cautious in what you share with Andrew. Of course, Ellie hesitated, then added, he asked about our relationship. I stayed as close to the established story as possible. Thank you. Douglas looked as if he might say more, then checked himself. Have a good day with Catherine. I'll see you this evening. James, the driver who'd skillfully evaded their pursuers days earlier, waited by the car. As Ellie settled into the back seat, she found herself unsettled by the conversation with Douglas. The idea that his own son might be allied with Richard's corporate coup attempt spoke to deeper family dysfunction than Martha had outlined in her briefing materials. Yet Douglas had taken a personal interest in Catherine's treatment, far beyond what their contract required. The contradiction was puzzling a man seemingly disconnected from his own son, yet concerned enough about a stranger's sister to arrange specialist consultations. The Douglas Harrington revealed in quiet moments was increasingly difficult to reconcile with the cold, calculating businessman she'd expected when signing their agreement, and that made maintaining professional distance increasingly challenging. At the hospital, Ellie found Catherine already prepped for her neural mapping session. Her sister's eyes brightened when Ellie entered the private room, another upgrade courtesy of the Harrington connection. There's my favorite fake wife, Catherine teased, keeping her voice low despite the private setting. How's married life treating you? Complicated, Ellie admitted, checking Catherine's chart with professional habit. His son showed up unexpectedly last night. Special Forces, just back from deployment. Catherine winced. Awkward. How'd that go? About as well as you'd expect. Suspicion, hostility, thinly veiled accusations about my motives. Ellie sighed, settling into the chair beside the bed. But Douglas arranged for Dr. Abrams to consult on your case. He's one of the top neural interface specialists in the country. That's, unexpected, Catherine observed. Not exactly required by your business arrangement. I know, Ellie frowned slightly. He's full of contradictions, formal and distant one moment, surprisingly thoughtful the next. A knowing smile spread across Catherine's face. Sounds like someone's developing feelings for her contract husband. Don't be ridiculous, Ellie scoffed, though perhaps too quickly. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. I'm simply observing unexpected complexities in his character. Uh-huh, observing complexities. Is that what they're calling it these days? Focus on your own recovery, Ellie redirected, checking Catherine's latest lab work. Your inflammatory markers are down significantly. The regenerative protocol seems to be working. Don't change the subject, Catherine persisted. What's he like when the business facade drops, when you're alone at that mansion? We're rarely alone, Ellie explained. Stonehaven is staffed, and we maintain separate wings as agreed. It's all very proper. Proper? Catherine's eyebrows rose. You're legally married to the man, sharing his home, attending events as his wife? There's nothing proper about the whole situation. Before Ellie could respond, Dr. Abrams entered a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Sheridan, he greeted her warmly, or should I say Mrs. Harrington. Now Douglas told me about your marriage. Congratulations. Thank you, Ellie replied automatically, the lie becoming more practiced with each repetition. And thank you for consulting on Catherine's case. Happy to help, Dr. Abrams assured her, moving to examine Catherine's chart. Douglas and I go back to his early days at HGD. His neural interface technology changed the game for spinal injury patients. He smiled at Catherine. And your sister's regenerative approach might be the missing piece we've been looking for. Together, they could revolutionize treatment outcomes. As Dr. Abrams explained the next phase of treatment, Ellie found herself distracted by his casual reference to Douglas. Not Colonel Harrington or Mr. Harrington, but Douglas spoken with the familiarity of genuine friendship. It occurred to her that despite Martha's detailed briefing materials, she knew very little about Douglas's actual relationships outside of business contexts. The treatment session proceeded with promising results. Catherine reported increased sensation in her upper thighs, the first significant improvement since her accident. The joy on her sister's face reminded Ellie why she'd agreed to this arrangement in the first place. Whatever complications arose with Douglas, Catherine's recovery made everything worthwhile. As the session concluded, Dr. Abrams took Ellie aside. Douglas mentioned you'll be presenting your research at the Harrington Foundation Gala. Yes, the Secretary of Defense expressed interest in potential military applications. Excellent. The Foundation's support could fast-track implementation for veterans' care. Dr. Abrams hesitated, then added in a lower voice, It's good to see Douglas connecting again. After Elizabeth died, well, many of us were concerned about him. You seem to be a positive influence. The comment left Ellie feeling oddly fraudulent. Their marriage was a business arrangement, not the emotional reconnection Douglas's friends clearly believed it to be. Yet she couldn't explain that to Dr. Abrams without violating their agreement. Douglas has been very supportive of my research, she said instead, which was entirely true. Not surprising, Dr. Abrams smiled. Elizabeth was the same way passionate about medical applications of their technology. You two would have gotten along famously. The comparison to Douglas's late wife was unexpected and oddly unsettling. Ellie murmured appropriate thanks and excused herself, needing a moment alone to process the conversation. In the hospital corridor, she found James waiting patiently, his professional demeanor giving no indication he'd been standing guard for hours. Ready to return to Stonehaven, ma'am. Actually, I'd like to stop by my research lab at the university, Ellie decided. I need to check on some ongoing experiments. Of course, I'll notify security to expect us. The drive to Chesapeake University took them through congested Washington traffic. Ellie used the time to review Catherine's treatment data on her tablet, but found her thoughts continually drifting to Douglas. Dr. Abrams' comments had painted a different picture than the calculating businessman Martha had described someone genuinely committed to medical advancement, who had withdrawn emotionally after personal loss. At the university, James accompanied her into the research building, maintaining a discreet but watchful presence. Ellie's lab team greeted her with enthusiasm tinged with curiosity about her sudden marriage and equally sudden research funding. Dr. Sheridan, her lead research assistant, Priya, hurried forward. "We didn't expect you today. The new equipment arrived yesterday. It's amazing. And the additional lab space is already being prepared." "Good." Ellie smiled, genuinely pleased by the rapid progress $10 million could facilitate. "How are the longitudinal samples from trial group B?" "Showing 63% neural regeneration at the injury site," Priya reported excitedly. "Best results we've ever seen. And with the expanded trial group now funded, we can begin testing variable protocols next month." For the next 2 hours, Ellie immersed herself in the familiar comfort of pure research data analysis, protocol refinements, and experimental design. Here, in her professional domain, the complications of her arrangement with Douglas faded temporarily into the background, until Priya approached with a tablet open to a society page. "Is this you at the British Embassy reception?" Ellie glanced at the screen to find a photograph of herself and Douglas. His hand rested at the small of her back, while she looked up at him with what appeared to be genuine affection. The caption read, "Defense Titan Douglas Harrington and neurologist wife Dr. Eleanor Sheridan make first public appearance since their surprise marriage." "Yes, that's me," Ellie confirmed, uncomfortable with her team's sudden interest in her personal life. "You never mentioned you knew Douglas Harrington," Priya said, curiosity evident. "And now you're married to him. It's like a movie plot." "We've known each other for years," Ellie deflected, sticking to their established story. "Sometimes the right timing takes a while." "Well, the funding is incredible," another researcher chimed in. 5 years of guaranteed support without grant applications. It's a researcher's dream. "And he's not exactly hard on the eyes," Priya added with a grin. "For a man his age, I mean—" Ellie found herself unexpectedly defensive. "Douglas is one of the most brilliant engineers in defense technology. His neural interface systems revolutionize prosthetic control mechanisms." "Of course," Priya backpedaled, clearly surprised by Ellie's reaction. "I just meant, it's nice that you found someone who understands your work." After Dr. Pearson, the reference to Robert, her ex-husband and former department chair, stung more than Ellie expected. "Yes, well, I should get back to Stonehaven. Douglas and I have foundation business to discuss." In the car, Ellie found herself uncharacteristically unsettled. Her defensive response to Priya's teasing had revealed something she wasn't ready to acknowledge: some shift in how she viewed Douglas. No longer just a contract partner, but someone whose intelligence and accomplishments she genuinely respected. James's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am, we're being followed." Ellie's head snapped up. "What, again?" "Black SUV, 3 cars back. It's maintained consistent distance since we left the university." James's tone remained professional, but his posture had tensed. "I'm going to take evasive action. Please secure your seatbelt." The car accelerated smoothly, weaving through traffic with practiced precision. Ellie gripped the door handle, watching in the side mirror as the black SUV kept pace. "I'm notifying Stonehaven Security," James said, pressing a button on the steering wheel. "Mockingbird, this is Sparrow. We have a tail. Requesting backup at coordinate point Delta," a voice responded through the car's speakers. "Copy, Sparrow. Assets deploying to intercept. ETA 4 minutes." "Who are these people?" Ellie asked, tension mounting as the SUV drew closer. "Industrial espionage wouldn't be this persistent, would it?" "This is different," James replied grimly. "More aggressive. Hold on, ma'am." The car swerved suddenly onto a side street, tires squealing. The pursuing vehicle followed, closing the distance. Ellie glimpsed the driver, a woman with short blonde hair and sunglasses, expression coldly determined. "Down," James ordered sharply as the SUV pulled alongside them. Ellie ducked just as something struck the reinforced window beside her head. Not a bullet this time either, but some kind of electronic device that attached to the glass with a magnetic clunk. EMP device, James identified immediately. They're trying to disable the car's electronics. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, but the car continued functioning normally. Harrington vehicles are hardened against electronic warfare, James explained, executing a sharp turn that momentarily shook their pursuer. Military-grade countermeasures. Ahead, two black sedans appeared, blocking the narrow street. James didn't slow down, driving straight toward the impromptu roadblock. At the last possible moment, the sedans parted, creating just enough space for their vehicle to pass through before closing ranks again, trapping the pursuing SUV. Ellie turned to watch through the rear window as men in tactical gear surrounded the SUV, weapons drawn. Harrington Security. Yes, ma'am. They'll identify the occupants and determine if this was corporate espionage or something more personal. Personal? Ellie's brow furrowed. You mean related to Douglas? James's expression revealed nothing. Colonel Harrington has many interests that generate opposition. Some corporate, some political, some from his military past. His military past, Ellie repeated slowly. From Desert Storm, you mean? Among other operations, James replied carefully. Some classified even now. The Colonel's Special Forces activities made certain enemies. This was new information. Martha's briefing had mentioned Douglas's military service, but focused primarily on his corporate leadership. The idea that his past operations might still generate active threats decades later was disturbing. Does this happen often? Ellie asked. These pursuit attempts. More frequently since the Archer contract negotiations began, James admitted. Though this is the second incident directly targeting you, which suggests a change in tactics. Targeting me? Ellie's voice rose slightly. Why would anyone target me? James met her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. Because you're now his most obvious vulnerability. Ma'am. The blunt assessment sent a chill through Ellie. She'd agreed to a business arrangement, a mutually beneficial contract. Nowhere in the terms had potential target for Douglas's enemies been mentioned. When they arrived at Stonehaven, Douglas was waiting in the driveway, his normally impassive expression tense with concern. He opened Ellie's door himself, eschewing protocol. Are you all right? He asked, his voice low and urgent. I'm fine, Ellie assured him, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. James handled it expertly. Douglas's hand closed around her elbow, guiding her firmly toward the house. Inside, now, in his study, with the door closed, Douglas's composure slipped slightly. This is the second incident in less than a week. The security protocols should have prevented this. James said they were targeting me specifically, Ellie said, settling into a leather chair. As your vulnerability. Douglas's jaw tightened. Yes, I should have anticipated this. Richard knows our marriage gives me stability in the board's eyes. Discrediting you or worse, harming you would undermine that stability. You think Richard is behind these attacks? Ellie asked, struggling to believe even an ambitious corporate rival would resort to such tactics. The timing is suspicious, Douglas replied, pacing the study with military precision. The first incident occurred immediately after our marriage. This one follows our public appearance at the embassy, where we convincingly presented as a couple. He stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. I've increased security, but these incidents suggest we need additional precautions. What kind of precautions? You shouldn't leave Stonehaven unescorted. Your lab visits should be scheduled in advance with security sweeps beforehand. Hospital visits for Catherine will continue with doubled security details. Ellie stood, bristling at these restrictions. I agreed to play your wife. Douglas, not become a prisoner. I have research to conduct. a sister to care for. I'm trying to keep you safe, Douglas countered, frustration edging his tone. These aren't arbitrary restrictions. If Richard is targeting you to get to me, then perhaps we should confront him directly. Ellie interrupted. Bring evidence of his corporate espionage to the board. End this cat-and-mouse game. It's not that simple, Douglas sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. Richard is cunning. He operates through layers of cutouts and proxies. We need concrete evidence linking him to these incidents, which we don't have yet. Ellie studied him carefully, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. What aren't you telling me? Douglas? He hesitated, then moved to his desk and unlocked a drawer. From it, he withdrew a file folder marked classified in red letters. This is why I believe Richard is more dangerous than simple corporate ambition would suggest. Ellie accepted the folder and opened it to find surveillance photos of Richard meeting with foreign nationals, transaction records showing large offshore payments, and intelligence reports suggesting connections to arms dealers operating in restricted markets. Richard isn't just trying to take control of HGD, Douglas explained quietly. He's planning to sell our most sensitive technology to foreign buyers, including potential adversaries. Technology that could compromise American military personnel in the field. The gravity of the situation suddenly crystallized for Ellie. This wasn't merely about a corporate power struggle or inheritance dispute. It was about national security, about the lives of soldiers like the ones she treated in Desert Storm. Why haven't you taken this to the FBI, the Pentagon? She asked, reviewing the damning documents. I have, discreetly, but Richard has powerful political connection senators on key committees, regulators who owe him favors. Without irrefutable proof linking him directly to these transactions, he's insulated. Douglas's expression hardened. The Archer contract is critical not just for HGD's future, but because it funds next-generation protective systems for our troops. Systems Richard would sell to the highest bidder if he gained control. Ellie closed the file, understanding now why Douglas had agreed to their unusual arrangement. The stability their marriage projected wasn't just about satisfying the board, it was about buying time to gather evidence against Richard before he could compromise vital defense technology. So our marriage is part of a larger strategy, she concluded. Maintaining your control of HGD is about more than corporate leadership or your grandfather's legacy. It's about preventing Richard from accessing sensitive technology. Douglas nodded. Yes, though the benefits to your research are equally genuine. I've long admired your work on neural regeneration. This unexpected compliment caught Ellie off guard. You were familiar with my research before Martha approached me. I make it my business to know the leading minds in fields relevant to HGD's medical division. Douglas replied, your approaches to neural pathway regeneration have potential applications beyond spinal injuries, including battlefield trauma and prosthetic interface optimization. The revelation that Douglas had known of her work before their arrangement added yet another layer of complexity to their relationship. This wasn't the random selection of a convenient female professional that Martha had implied. Douglas had specifically chosen her, not just for appearances, but for genuine professional respect. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Ellie asked. About Richard's illegal activities, about your familiarity with my research. Would it have changed your decision? Douglas countered. You needed funding for Catherine's treatment and your research. I needed a wife to satisfy the board and buy time against Richard. The arrangement made sense regardless of the details. The details matter. Douglas, Ellie insisted. They changed the nature of our partnership. The word hung between them, carrying more weight than either had intended. Partnership implied a shared purpose beyond contractual obligations, a mutual investment in outcomes. Before Douglas could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal Andrew, his expression grim. Dad, we need to talk. Now. His eyes shifted to Ellie, then back to his father. Alone. Whatever you need to say can be said in front of Ellie, Douglas replied, his tone reverting to military authority. Andrew's jaw tightened a gesture so like his father's that Ellie couldn't help noticing the resemblance. Fine. Your security team just detained a woman following Ellie's car. A woman I recognized. Douglas frowned. Recognized from where? From photos in your personal files. The ones you keep in your classified archive. Andrew's voice dropped. It was Sarah Blackwood, Richard's sister. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Richard's own sister had personally pursued Ellie's car, attempted to disable it with an EMP device. This wasn't outsourced corporate espionage. It was family vendetta. Sarah, Douglas's composure slipped momentarily. Are you certain a positive? I saw her at Mom's funeral. Remember, she made quite an impression with that speech about how you'd changed since taking over the company. Andrew stepped closer, lowering his voice. Dad, what the hell is going on? Why is Mom's sister-in-law trying to run your wife off the road? Douglas's expression closed like a steel trap. That's a complex question with classified components. Andrew, what's relevant is that Richard appears to be escalating his tactics. Classified components, Andrew repeated incredulously. Dad, I have top secret clearance. I'm special forces. For God's sake, this isn't about clearance levels. Douglas replied evenly. It's about operational security. The fewer people who know the full picture, the better. Andrew's frustration was palpable. So I'm just supposed to accept that Richard and Sarah are targeting Ellie for some mysterious reason related to corporate politics? That doesn't make sense. Dad. It does if you understand Richard's true objectives, Ellie interjected, drawing surprised looks from both men. Douglas, he deserves to know. He's your son, and apparently he's been pulled into this, whether we intended it or not. Douglas hesitated, then nodded once a military commander accepting tactical advice from a trusted lieutenant. You're right, but not here. He glanced around the study meaningfully. The secure room, 10 minutes. After Andrew left, Douglas turned to Ellie. You don't have to be part of this briefing. It will involve classified information that could potentially put you at greater risk. I'm already at risk, apparently, Ellie pointed out dryly. And I'm tired of partial information. If I'm going to be a target in this corporate war, I want to understand exactly why. Douglas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. The secure room is in the basement, completely shielded from electronic surveillance. We'll discuss everything there. As they walked through Stonehaven's elegant corridors toward the basement stairs, Ellie felt a surreal disconnect between the mansion's refined luxury and the espionage drama unfolding within its walls. She'd agreed to a straightforward business arrangement, pretend to be Douglas's wife, secure funding for her research, help her sister walk again. Instead, she found herself headed to a secure room to discuss classified operations, corporate espionage, and international arms dealing. All while being targeted by the sister of her fake husband's late wife's brother. Nothing in their meticulously drafted contract had prepared her for this reality. Yet strangely, Ellie found herself more intrigued than frightened. The scientist in her, the problem solver. The analyst was fully engaged by the puzzle Douglas Harrington represented. And the woman in her, the part she tried to ignore since signing their agreement, couldn't help noticing how his protective instincts had surfaced when he thought she was in danger. How concern had momentarily cracked his carefully maintained composure. 1 year, she reminded herself as they descended the stairs. Just 1 year, and then their arrangement would conclude. She would return to her research. Catherine would hopefully be walking, and Douglas would either have secured his company against Richard's machinations or lost the corporate battle entirely. Their paths would diverge, this strange interlude complete. So why did that prospect suddenly feel like loss rather than release? The secure room resembled a hybrid between a military command center and a corporate boardroom. Monitors lined one wall, displaying security feeds from around Stonehaven. A large conference table dominated the center, its surface incorporating touchscreen technology. The entire space hummed with sophisticated equipment. Andrew was already waiting, examining a digital map of the property with its security perimeter clearly marked. He glanced up as they entered, his expression guarded but less hostile than before. "This place still exists?" he asked, gesturing around the room. "Mom always hated it, said it was Dad's war room in the middle of her home." "It's been upgraded," Douglas replied, pressing his palm to a scanner that activated the room's systems. "Biometric security, quantum encryption, autonomous power supply, completely isolated from external networks unless specifically connected." "Paranoid much," Andrew muttered, though without real rancor. "Prudent," Douglas corrected, bringing the main screen to life. "Computer, load file Blackwood Omega, authorization Harrington Delta 69. The screen filled with photographs, documents, and data visualizations, an intelligence analyst's collage of Richard Blackwood's activities. Douglas turned to Andrew, his expression deadly serious. "What I'm about to share is classified under national security protocols. Disclosure without authorization is a federal offense." He glanced at Ellie. "That applies to both of you." Andrew straightened instinctively, military training responding to the formal tone. "Understood, sir." "Richard has been under investigation for 3 years," Douglas began, bringing forward financial transaction records. "Initially for tax evasion and securities fraud, relatively minor offenses that nonetheless concern the board. But 6 months ago, one of our cybersecurity teams discovered something more disturbing." The screen shifted to show intercepted communications between Richard and foreign entities. "Richard has been negotiating with representatives from China, Russia, and several non-state actors to sell HGD's proprietary neural interface technology." Andrew's expression darkened. "The technology used in our advanced targeting systems, the ones deployed with forward operating teams. Among other applications." "Yes," Douglas confirmed. "In the wrong hands, this technology could be reverse engineered to track and target American operators in the field. Your teammates." "Andrew." The personal implication wasn't lost on Andrew. His posture shifted subtly, anger replacing skepticism. "And the board doesn't know about this. They know Richard has been investigating international partnership opportunities," Douglas explained. "What they don't know is that these partnerships involve selling technology to potential adversaries through shell companies and cutouts." "Where does Sarah fit into this?" Ellie asked, studying the network diagram linking various entities. Douglas brought forward a new set of documents. "Sarah has been Richard's financial facilitator. Her background in international banking gives her the expertise to move money through jurisdictions where scrutiny is minimal." "And the attacks on us," Ellie pressed. "Why target me specifically? Because you've stabilized Dad's position," Andrew answered before Douglas could, his analytical mind clearly connecting the dots. "The board was concerned about his isolation, his supposed PTSD issues. Your marriage counters that narrative." Douglas nodded. "Richard's timeline has been accelerated. The Archer contract decision is in 6 weeks. Once secured, it will solidify my leadership position beyond challenge. He's desperate to undermine me before then. By targeting Ellie," Andrew concluded, "discredit the marriage, revive concerns about your stability, create an opening for a leadership challenge. But attacking my car," Ellie shook her head, "that seems extreme for corporate maneuvering." "Richard and Sarah aren't just ambitious," Douglas said quietly. "They're vindictive. Elizabeth's decision to leave her shares to me rather than her brother has festered for 8 years. This isn't just business for them, it's personal." Andrew had been studying the intelligence materials with growing concern. "Does the Pentagon know about the technology leak risk?" "Select officials, yes, but without irrefutable proof, they can't move against Richard directly. His political connections provide insulation. Which is why you needed to secure your position through other means," Andrew concluded, glancing at Ellie with new understanding. "The marriage?" "Among other measures," Douglas acknowledged. "The Foundation Gala next month will include the Pentagon committee responsible for the Archer contract. Their approval effectively secures HGD's future direction under my leadership." And if Richard suspects you're onto him, Ellie asked, couldn't that make him more dangerous? Not less. It already has, Douglas confirmed grimly. The surveillance and pursuit attempts are escalating, which is why security protocols must be followed precisely. He turned to Andrew. Including by you, no communications about this matter on unsecured channels? Andrew straightened, military bearing overtaking family tension. Understood, sir. What role do you need me to play? The simple question, with its implicit offer of support, seemed to catch Douglas off guard. For a brief moment, Ellie glimpsed something vulnerable in his expression, a father surprised by his son's willingness to help. Your background in intelligence operations would be valuable, Douglas said carefully. If you're willing to postpone your leave to assist, consider me on board, Andrew replied without hesitation. Nobody targets my family, even if the newest member is unexpected. He nodded toward Ellie, the gesture carrying reluctant acceptance. Thank you, Douglas said, the words carrying more weight than the simple expression warranted. Ellie watched this cautious rapprochement between father and son with interest. The classified briefing had accomplished what months of normal family interaction might not have: a shared mission, a common enemy, a purpose that transcended their personal differences. We should establish regular, secure briefings, Douglas continued, back in tactical mode. Daily at 0700 in this room. Ellie, your schedule at the hospital and lab will need security coordination. Andrew, I'd like you to review our current protocols for vulnerabilities. Yes, sir. Andrew responded automatically. Douglas turned to Ellie. I understand this is far beyond what you agreed to in our arrangement. If you wish to reconsider, I'm not going anywhere. Ellie interrupted firmly. Catherine's treatment is showing promising results. My research is finally properly funded, and apparently I'm already a target whether I stay or go. Besides, she added with a small smile, I've never backed down from a challenge. Something that might have been admiration flickered in Douglas's eyes. That's appreciated. As they exited the secure room, Andrew pulled Ellie aside, letting Douglas walk ahead. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm still not convinced this marriage is entirely what it appears to be, but I've never seen my father willingly bring anyone into that room, not even longtime business associates. Whatever is happening between you two, it's clearly not just for show. Before Ellie could formulate a response, Andrew continued up the stairs, leaving her with the unsettling observation. She'd maintained emotional distance from Douglas since signing their agreement, or at least, she'd tried to. Yet somewhere between contract clauses and security briefings, something had shifted. Professional respect had developed into genuine admiration for his strategic mind. Clinical observation had evolved into personal concern for his well-being. Contractual cooperation had transformed into something that felt remarkably like partnership. 1 year, she reminded herself again as she climbed the stairs. Just 1 year, and then back to normal life. But as she reached the main floor and glimpsed Douglas waiting for her, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening light streaming through Stonehaven's windows, Ellie wondered if normal would ever feel the same again. The rose garden bloomed in late summer glory, each carefully tended flower catching the golden evening light. Douglas stood by the bench where Elizabeth had once spent hours, his hand now intertwined with Ellie's as they watched Catherine take careful, miraculous steps across the lawn, Andrew hovering protectively at her side. They had come to this place as strangers bound by paper and necessity, a desperate scientist and a solitary warrior, each carrying wounds invisible to the naked eye. What began as signatures on a contract had weathered gunfire, betrayal, and the collapse of carefully constructed walls that had protected nothing worth saving. The Pentagon had their technology. Richard had his justice. The company had its future secured. But the real victory lay in what couldn't be measured by stock prices or military contracts, a family reassembled from broken pieces, stronger at the fracture points. I never expected this outcome when I signed our agreement, Ellie said softly, her fingers tightening around his. Douglas looked down at their wedding rings, no longer symbols of convenience, but covenants of choice. Some arrangements begin on paper, he replied, but end up written on the heart. In the distance, Catherine laughed at something Andrew said, the sound carrying across the garden like a benediction. Some journeys begin with desperation, but end in places we never thought to look for home.